In the summer of 1940, the world was holding its breath. Hitler's war machine had steamrolled Europe, and the lights of freedom were going out one by one. The armies of France had fallen, and Great Britain, a small island, now stood alone, staring across the Channel at a continent in the grip of a monstrous tyranny. The military situation was beyond dire. After the miraculous but costly evacuation at Dunkirk, the British Army was home, but most of its heavy equipment was left behind, littering the beaches of France. Invasion didn't just seem possible, it felt inevitable. Bombs and bullets weren't working. The physical weapons of war simply weren't enough. But just as military force was hitting its limit, Britain's new and largely unproven Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, fell back on a weapon he'd been sharpening his entire life. It was a weapon that needed no steel and no explosives. This is the story of how 3 simple language tricks in a single speech helped rally a nation to stand against an empire and save the free world. To really get the power of Churchill's words, you have to understand the chilling silence they broke. The date was June 18, 1940. Just 4 days earlier, Paris had fallen. France, Britain's most powerful ally, had just asked for an armistice, basically surrendering to Hitler. The British Expeditionary Force had been pushed into the sea at Dunkirk, and while over 300,000 men were saved, it was a retreat, not a victory. Britain was isolated, outgunned, and bracing for an invasion that everyone feared was coming. And the man leading this island nation. Winston Churchill wasn't the icon we know today. He'd only been Prime Minister for a few weeks and was eyed with suspicion by many in his own government, some of whom still wanted to negotiate with Hitler. To them, he was a reckless warmonger with a history of bad judgment. So he was fighting a war on 2 fronts, one against the enemy across the Channel and another against the doubt and defeatism at home. In this moment of crisis, Churchill knew the next battle wouldn't just be fought with tanks or ships. The real battleground was the mind. He had to turn paralyzing fear into pure defiance. He couldn't give them more planes overnight, but he could give them something else, a story to believe in. As one journalist put it, Churchill mobilized the English language and sent it into battle, and his arsenal was built on 3 brutally effective techniques. Churchill's first move was to make the stakes absolute. This wasn't just another war between nations. He framed it as a crusade against an ancient evil. He didn't just talk about beating Germany. He painted a terrifying, clarifying picture of the enemy. He defined the devil. In his finest hour speech, he used language that stripped the Nazis of any political legitimacy. He described their regime as a monstrous tyranny, never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. That's not the language of diplomacy. It's the language of damnation. He wasn't just fighting a country, he was fighting a cancer on human history. The genius of this was its simplicity. By defining the enemy as pure evil, the choice became binary, resistance or annihilation. There was no middle ground. How do you negotiate with the abyss? This tactic silenced the voices of appeasement who were quietly suggesting a deal with Hitler might be the sensible path. This is a masterclass in what the ancient rhetoricians called pathos, an appeal to emotion. He used fear not to paralyze people, but to galvanize them. He warned that if they failed, the world would sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Think about that phrase, perverted science. He's saying this isn't just a return to the past, it's a high-tech nightmare. It was a vision of hell so vivid that any sacrifice in the fight against it would feel not just necessary but noble. He gave them a devil to fight, and in doing so, he made them feel like angels. Churchill's second trick was to pair that terrifying vision of defeat with a cold, logical reason for hope. He made defeat unthinkable, not just emotionally, but rationally. First, he expanded the stakes beyond Britain. In the speech, he declared, "Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire." He told the people they weren't just fighting for their own homes, they were the last bastion for the whole world. If they failed, he warned, the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink. This wasn't just a burden, it was a grant of incredible importance. He made a small, isolated island feel like the pivot upon which the fate of the free world turned. But emotion wasn't enough. The British are a practical people. They needed to believe victory was actually possible, and this is where he brings in his brilliant use of logos, the appeal to logic. In the same speech, he lays out a clear, strategic reason to fight on, stating with chilling simplicity, "Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war." That one sentence is genius. It completely reframes their biggest weakness, being alone, into their greatest strength. It told the people that just enduring wasn't a passive act of survival, it was an offensive strategy. By simply not losing, they were actively winning. It gave every pilot, every factory worker, every citizen a direct role in a clear military objective. He gave them a logical foundation for hope. The message was clear. The road ahead is brutal, but our resolve is the rock that will break the enemy's entire war machine. The final trick was maybe the most brilliant of all. Churchill knew people don't just fight for today, they fight for their place in history. So he wrote their chapter in the history books for them, before the battle was even won. He gave them a vision of their own future glory. You can see this perfectly in the immortal closing lines of the speech. After laying out the stakes and the strategy, he concludes, "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour." The brilliance is the subtle shift in perspective. The whole speech he uses we and us. But in that final line, he shifts to they. He's literally time-traveling his audience into the future, letting them look back on themselves as legends. He told them their suffering had a purpose, that it wasn't a meaningless ordeal but the raw material of a legend. They weren't just living through a war, they were living inside their own epic. This was more than a call to duty. It was an invitation to immortality. It assured them that when they felt most alone and forgotten, their courage would echo through the ages. Churchill gave them a legacy to fight for. He gave them their finest hour. The finest hour speech was delivered in the House of Commons, and then a recording was broadcast to the nation that evening. While we see it as a masterpiece today, the immediate public reaction was mixed. Some even found his gravelly delivery uninspiring, with a few listeners thinking he sounded drunk. But the power of the words cut through. The speech laid the psychological foundation for what became the Battle of Britain and the Blitz spirit. It was the moment fear started to curdle into defiance. So were these three tricks just clever rhetoric? No, they were something far more profound. They were an act of leadership. Churchill understood that war is a contest of wills as much as it is a contest of weapons. He knew that hope isn't just an emotion, but a weapon you can forge and wield. He used language to reframe reality, give meaning to suffering, and build a fortress in the mind that German bombs could never break. His leadership is a timeless lesson in the power of communication. He proved that words aren't just for describing the world, they're for changing it. In the darkest days of the 20th century, one man stood up and, with little more than the English language, rallied a nation to its feet. If you believe words can change the world, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. And if you want to see another master of language in action, check out our video on how Abraham Lincoln's speeches reshaped a nation. Thanks for watching.